Hi and welcome. Thanks for watching the video. In this video, we are going to see what is Azure Function and how to use it. First, let's talk about what is Azure Function. Azure Function lets you run small pieces of code that are known as functions. And it also takes care of the application infrastructure and you need not worry about the same. Azure will provide up-to-date servers you need to keep your application running, that too at a desired scale. In Azure will run your function whenever there is an event of a specific type. So these are known as triggers. So triggers can be changes in data, HTTP request, message arrival in a queue, or it can be a specific configured scheduled time as well. So you have multiple services that are present in Azure. So to integrate your Azure function with these services, Azure has provided a way to achieve this by using something known as bindings. So the use of binding is that, so whenever you need to integrate other services with a function, so you need not write a code and that is readily available. So you provide data from the binding to a function as a parameter. So whenever there is a integration with other services, so the data that is incoming from some service that can be accessed by using function parameter. So the bindings are basically directional, wherein you can provide bindings into the function and binding going out from the function. This is known as input and the output bindings respectively. So based on this diagram, we can say that Azure function is something which lets you run small pieces of code as a serverless without worrying about the infrastructure, which can be triggered by some kind of event, and there is a facility to integrate with other services using bindings. So on a high level, that is what Azure function is. Now let's see what all features Azure function provides. So as we discussed, Azure function is serverless, so you need not worry about the underlying infrastructure. You also have multiple choices for the languages that you can choose from. You are going to pay only for the time your function runs and not for the idle time at all. With the support of bindings, you can actually integrate with variety of Azure services with no code for this integration. An HTTP trigger function can be secured using OAuth providers such as Facebook, Twitter, Azure Active Directory itself, Google, etc. And also the next is a durable function. So you can implement the chain of functions by using durable functions where you can maintain the state. And the last Azure function runtime is actually open source and is available on GitHub. So these are few Azure function features that are available. Let's talk about triggers and bindings. So it is important topic for Azure function because this will help you understand when Azure function can be run and how you can integrate it with other services easily. So first let's see what is trigger. So trigger is nothing but a specific type of event which causes function to run. A function must have only one trigger and it can have associated data as well, which is often provided as the payload of the function. And binding defines if your function is connected to another service inwards or the outwards. So when you define binding with direction in, that means whenever function runs, so you are going to access some service which is defined as the binding with the direction in. And when you define bindings with direction out, that means that whenever your function completes your execution, it is going to access some service. Maybe for example, you can consider a blob storage. So you are going to write some data into the blob storage, which is defined as the type of a binding with the direction out. And by default, triggers are with the direction in. So these are the inbuilt feature of Azure functions, which can provide facility to integrate your function with other services without writing a single line of code, and which can be configured easily. So that is the main advantage of triggers and the bindings. So now let us consider a few scenarios and see what fits in for the trigger type and the binding combination. So first let us consider a requirement where you are using a queue service and you want that whenever there is a message in a queue, you want function to process it and enter a new message in another queue. So in this case, what you are going to do is, so you are going to use a trigger of type queue, And as far as bindings are concerned, so you are going to use binding q uh, for the direction out, because you are not accessing any q data for the inward direction. So this will fit our requirement that function trigger type will be q and binding will be q. So in this case, the queue that we are using for the trigger and the queue that we are using for the bindings are different queues. So you are reading a data from one queue and processing the data and creating a new message out of it, and then you are writing the data in a separate queue which may be connected to another service or may be connected to another function as well. So that is one scenario. Now let us consider a second scenario where you want to develop a scheduled job that reads a file from blob storage and do some operation based on that blob storage, and add a data to a Cosmos DB document after the function completes the execution. So in this case, what you are going to use is the trigger will be timer trigger. So because as we mentioned, it is a scheduled job, so on a specific time it will run. So the bindings will be inward direction for the blob storage and out direction for the Cosmos DB, because what you are doing is whenever function runs, so it will be a timer based, and when it executes it will read the data from blob storage, process the data from the blob storage, and based on that it will write some data into the Cosmos DB. That's why we have given out direction to the Cosmos DB binding. Now let's consider third scenario, that you want to develop an API where after the request is received you want to send a message via email. So in this case you will use HTTP trigger because it is an API, so it will be trigger based on this request, so it will be kind of an API. So and for the bindings, what you want to do is you want to send an email, so you are going to use bindings as send grid for the out direction, because you are not accessing any data whenever function starts the execution, so it will be none. But for the out direction you are using send grid. So by using send grid you can send the messages through email. So these are few scenarios which you can use for the triggers and the binding. Now let's talk about what are the options available for pricing. So the Azure function costing is different based on what options you choose. So there are three options you have for choosing the plan, so which is consumption plan, premium plan, and the app service plan. So whenever you choose any of the options available, so it differs based on few factors such as how the scaling is happening, what are the resources available for each function app, and what is the support of advanced features. Now let us see how it differs between the plans. So both the consumption and the premium plans automatically add compute power when required. It is automatically scaled out when load is increased and scaled in when no longer it is needed. And in consumption plan, you don't even pay for the idle VMs or reserved capacity in advance. Whereas for app service plan, you use dedicated infrastructures, and here you need to manually configure for auto scaling or the manual scaling. And in case of consumption plan, your function can run for maximum of 10 minutes, after which you will no longer be able to run it for each instances. So in other two cases there is no limit, however you have to configure the time for the same. So for a consumption plan, if the execution of the function exceeds the 10 minutes, so you will get an exception and it will stop the execution. So in consumption plan, you pay only for the execution time, whereas in premium plan, you pay for the core seconds and the memory used. Also in case of premium, you have pre-warm instances for which you pay. And for app service plan, you pay as per the pricing of app service plan, which we already covered, how you pay for the app services. So that is the difference for app service and the other two cases. So in serverless architecture, you pay only for the compute power you use. Hence, for this need, you use consumption plan. To achieve serverless need, Azure will add or remove compute power as and when needed. Hence, when your function does not run for a particular period of time, so Azure will take down the resources, and when request comes, it will start the function. So in this case, sometimes function may take time longer than usual to react to event. So this is known as the cold start. So there is a increase in the latency. So that is known as the cold start. So in premium plan, you can have instances always ready to avoid the cold start, and these are known as the pre-warmed instances, which are kept as the buffer to scale out in real time. So that is the difference. So in consumption plan, as it is a serverless in nature, so it you may experience cold start if your function does not run for a specific period of time. But in case of premium plan, to avoid that, you can go from pre consumption plan to premium plan, where you don't have a cold start because you already have the pre-warm instances available for you. And in case of app service plan, to avoid the cold start, what you can do is you can enable the feature which is known as the always on. So always on feature is only available in case of app service plan, where your function will be running all the time. But in case of consumption plan, your function does not run for all the time, because whenever there is no request for your function, so it will go down. So that is the difference. Also, premium plan provides a few advanced features for you, such as vnet connectivity as well. So that is how you choose your plan based on your need. So we saw what is Azure function, what are bindings and triggers. Now let's try to log into Azure portal and try to create some function. Now I'm logged into my Azure portal, so I'll just create a function. So we need to understand that before we create a function, we need to create a function app. So function app is a platform where you can have multiple functions that you can deploy. So first let's create function app. So let's try to create a resource group as well, because I don't have any. So this will be the function app URL for you. So I'll choose .NET Core, and next click on hosting. So now here you can see that it requires a storage account as well. So to store the logs and all those things, internal things, it needs a storage account. And the second thing is the operating system. I will choose the Windows based uh, function app. And as we discussed, there are basically three types: consumption, premium, and app service. So consumption is a serverless choice for us, so now I'm keeping it as a consumption plan, and I'll keep the option as is. And let's go to review and create. It is going to validate if we have filled all the data. Now I'm going to click on the create. Now the deployment is in progress. So it took around a couple of minutes to deploy the Azure function app. So now I'll just go to the resources. So this is the function app that we have created, and we don't have any code deployed, and we don't have any functions as well in this app. So if you click on the functions, so here you will see that there are no function app. So if you have any function app, so it will list down all the functions that are present for in this particular function app. What is the trigger type of the function, and what is the status, whether it is running or not. So first let's try to create one. Now you see when you click on add function, so you will get a window which is for creating a new function in this function app. So you can see there are templates available for functions. So as we discussed, there are different function that we can develop based on the trigger type, based on the bindings. So these are few templates that Microsoft recommends us based on the common user. So first let's try to create a HTTP trigger function. I'll name it as get details. So now if you see it has created a get details function. Now if we go on the function app, so here you can see that we have created a new function of type HTTP trigger. So this will be acting as an API. And if you click on function, so you have options here: code, test, integration, monitor, and the function keys. So if you click on the code test part, so it will show you the code over here. So this is basically the default code that comes in whenever you create HTTP function from the portal. So remember that there are a couple of ways we can create function. One is through the portal. So now we have created this function from the portal itself, and the second option is you can create function in Visual Studio Code, and then from there you can deploy the code. So there are two options, so you can choose from. So now it is a very simple HTTP request handling is there. So nothing complex here. It is just reading the query parameter name, and it is just trying to print something as a response. It is giving back response to the client. And if you click on the integration part, so here you can see that the trigger type is HTTP trigger. The function, what is the output, it will return the output. No input is specified here. And monitor is something where you can see the logs of the function. So here we have not made any request for this particular function, so we don't have any record as of now. But if you just click on the code plus test, so here you can test the application from the portal itself. And as you can see here, the get function URL, so basically this will give you the URL of this function, so which is the function app.azurewebsites.net. So if you want to test this function from the different tools such as Postman, so you can just get this URL and call it. So now I'll just click on this test run. So here it gives you facility to call to this particular HTTP trigger API, and it is expecting a parameter of a name. I'm just giving you the example of name, which is John, and now it is a simple HTTP request, so we don't have any expectation of passing the different payload as such. So I'll just click on run. So here you can see the log, it's connected, and now in the output section you can see the response code is 200, which is okay. And this is what the API has returned. Hello John, this is HTTP trigger function executed successfully. So that's a simple HTTP trigger function that we have created from the portal, and we have just tested it by calling through the facility that is provided here itself. So now if I just go to monitor section, so you can see the logs over here. So we just made one call from the portal, and you can see the date and what is the status, whether it is a success, what is the result code that is returned, and how much time it took to complete the process. So these details will be there. So if any call gets failed, so you can just track here whether the call was failed or success. So that is how you can monitor the function results. So that's how you can create a HTTP trigger function from the portal itself. So now we have created a function app and also created for HTTP trigger function from the portal itself. So now we will try to create the HTTP trigger function from the Visual Studio. So if I just create a new Azure function, so I'll name it as HTTP example, and I'll just click on the create part. And if you see here, so it will ask you which kind of trigger you want to create. So it will list down the different choices, such as blob trigger, Cosmos DB trigger, event hub trigger, and HTTP trigger. So blob trigger will be a function which will run whenever there is a entry in the blob, and whenever there is update in the Cosmos DB, so Cosmos DB trigger function will run. So we are not going there, so we'll just try to create a HTTP trigger for now. So now if you see, it has created function for us, and this will be the default code that comes with the template. So it is a HTTP trigger function. If you see here, there is an attribute which is HTTP trigger, and this will be a method which will read the request, and it will just print out or return name that you have provided through the query parameter. So the similar code that we have used in the portal, the same code it gives from the template. So if you want to write your own stuff, you can do that. So it is a pretty much similar code and straightforward. So we'll just try to deploy this one. So before we deploy that code, you can get the publish profile of this function app from here. So if you just click on get publish profile, so you will get the file here, which is a publish setting file, so that you can use to deploy your code from the Visual Studio itself. So now if we just click on the publish, so you will get this window. So if I just click on import profile, so now if you see in the download section, you will have this public setting file that we have downloaded from the portal. So I'll just import that profile. So now if you see, we are deploying to our function app. So if I just click on publish, so now after a couple of minutes the publish is done. So now if we go to portal, so you can see under the function you have this function one app, which we have written here. So this is the function one. So now we have deployed this version of the function app from the Visual Studio. So now if I click on function one and just click on the code test, so let's test again. So here you can see that we have received 200 OK response, and uh, the parameter that we passed is displayed over here. Now let's try to access this particular function from the Postman as well. So see, now we have got the response from the function. So this was the code that we deployed from the Visual Studio. So now you can create different types of triggers, and you can deploy your code and test it from the portal, or you can test it from the Postman as well. So now I have just changed this particular response that we are sending, so that it will be clear that actually this code is getting executed, and not because the code that was present on the portal and the code that is present in the Visual Studio are same. So just to differentiate that one, so I'm just making some change, and I'm just redeploying this particular function app. So if you notice, we already have this publish profile, so I'll just click on publish. So now the publish is done. So I'll just go to Postman and again hit the URL. So now if you see, the message is changed. So that's how you can create function from the portal and from the Visual Studio as well. So that's it for Azure Functions. So I hope now you are aware of how to create function and deploy it from the Visual Studio or create from the portal as well. Thank you.